Welcome to our world. A world where fiction and reality intertwine, a reality where fiction prevails, fiction that you believe to be true. And whether it's true or not, you experience it as truth. For you, that truth is reality. The reality is, in fact, that you create the world around you. And that is the truth. This truth will set you free, because if you are free to create the world you want, then no one will remain on this minuscule grain of sand in that vast universe. Then we will push our boundaries. If we were to do that, we would be remarkably busy in the first place. Our world literally has no end. It is an endless expanse in which you will always be a minuscule center. And even if you were to rise from that plane, you would always remain in the same proportion of distance from the sun and the moon. They will always be as far away from you as ever, they are your reflections. And when it's dark and you gaze at the starry sky, you actually see something quite different from what you think you see. What you see is a two-dimensional environment curved around you. If you look around while looking up, you can imagine yourself in some kind of sphere. If you place a time-lapse camera on that northern star, you will indeed see the entire blanket of stars rotating around this star as a fixed whole, always the same. We are the center of that universe, but that universe is a tightly stretched holographic blanket around this world. What we perceive as a projection or fluctuation is actually a clear graphic projection. We exist as holographic projections on a two-dimensional plane. But you might be thinking, that can't be true, because we are three-dimensional beings. When we look at our solar system or the universe, there is something called the flatness problem. This means that everything seems to exist and move on a perfect disk, as if you were cutting a ball in half and placing it on a horizontal surface, but on a cosmic scale. So, all planets are aligned on a flat line, like circles rotating around another circle, on a two-dimensional plane. And that is also what's happening. So, how can we, as three-dimensional beings, experience an abstract two-dimensional world? A world without depth or height, where you can only move forward or backward, or from left to right. Well, you can imagine that even for a line or a point to exist in a dimension, a minimum of 3 dimensions is depicted. Let's say you draw a circle. That's a two-dimensional object. However, at the microscopic level, there is still some height discernible because the pencil drew a circle that stands slightly higher on the paper than the rest. There is a scale where a kind of elevation is possible within this dimension. Of course, it's a very small scale, but it's possible. So, what does it mean that when we look at the stars, we are essentially looking at a two-dimensional surface? It means that if the stars and such are a two-dimensional encoded holographic surface, there must be a tiny space in the entire reality where we, as a third dimension, can take form. And that space indeed exists. We call it the Planck scale. There is no smaller scale than the Planck scale. It's the realm of subatomic particles, the smallest forms of matter. And if we zoom in on the tiniest form of matter, everything starts anew. It's stacked fractally. What we see when we look under the microscope in the dimension above is that we, as humanity on Earth, are located on the horizon of a black hole. We are captured by this black hole. We were once in that higher dimension and could move freely, with much greater self-awareness than what we experience now. It's a great mystery why monopolies are not detected in our universe. While there should be a monopole that quantifies and explains electrical charge, it actually tells us that it's all around us, but we simply can't find it. That's why we've naturally assumed that they are either incredibly small or unreachable, present only per universe. But small and large are matters of scaling and perspective. I've seen so many theses and scientific work in recent months, it's not normal. And I definitely don't claim to understand it all. But if you keep reading the same material every day, you eventually build a basic knowledge. Don't ask me to perform incredibly complex calculations off the top of my head or on paper, but I understand what needs to be done, or why a calculation is made. It's mostly about understanding the text and paying attention. Every time, we find phrases, clues, or hints that can save a lot of time or show fascinating things, or lead us astray completely. But because we stick to plausibility and a somewhat scientific standard, we keep his fantasies somewhat restrained. So many fantasies have been put out into the world, especially by our leaders, who spared no effort to dumb us down, to keep us ignorant, to keep us small. In the past months of reading all these research papers, I've come across all those big names in physics several times. For example, I'm learning that we live on a black hole, all together on a surface. And the subject of black holes has, of course, been extensively mapped out by all those scholars. As if they knew something, because otherwise, it wouldn't be interesting at all, since a black hole is so far away from here according to them. But we'll never know the exact distances in this form and phase of our life or existence. Because they won't tell us, and we'll never get there. We're closed off from the universe through a holographic boundary layer, a screen, a surface that goes on endlessly at the Planck scale, which is infinitely small. The monopole carries consciousness and exists in the real, overarching universe. Our 4D spacetime has arisen from a collision between two opposing monopoles in that higher dimension. This collision creates a massive explosion and a tear in the PQV. There's also an explosion in the higher dimension, a rapid discharge and event. However, a completely new dimension is created. It gives birth to the Big Bang. There's a huge time delaying factor between dimension scales. What is an explosion in the dimension above manifests as an event that may take billions of years. It's precisely the moment when time begins to run in our 4D spacetime. The dimension is created, and all sorts of matter and antimatter are swept into it. The magnetic monopoles that temporarily collide and end up in a swirling knot create a magnetically charged black hole in this dimension, in which they and we are trapped. We are splinters of those conscious opposing monopoles, who were initially free creators in their universe but have now merged and turned inside out, from being one with the universe to being alone in the universe, no longer knowing who we are, what we're doing, and having an internal conflict between good and evil in an unfair world. The Big Bang is the birth of perceiving consciousness, a tiny part of the all-creating whole that it can actually embody. And we also exist on the smallest scale imaginable. Of all living beings and the wondrous creation of the universe, we are the Planck scale. When we look at the stars at night, we're actually seeing a subatomic environment.